welcome to everyone, and then apologies. We've had apologies from both the Chief Constable and the Deputy, who can't be with us, Jackie Bland and Alison from the Chief's office. Any other apologies? Moving on then to item 2 on the agenda, and we may be joined by a member of the public as well. Moving on, just to say, we're not being filmed, of course, but we are being recorded, and that may be uploaded onto the website. So if you don't want your voice to be heard, you need not to speak. Item 3 is announcements, and I don't have any announcements unless somebody else has one. So on then to public questions, and we do have a question from a member of the public. It's quite long. There's quite a bit of commentary before we get to the question. So what I thought I'd do is ensure that the commentary gets put up on our website, but we'll move quickly to the questions because of time. It's from the Vice Chair of Firth Park Neighbourhood Network, Nasser Raouf, and it concerns Page Hall. So I think we're all well aware of what the issues are in Page Hall. The 3 questions that come out of that I'll get to very quickly. But briefly, what the Vice Chair of that network is saying is that the problems there are continuing and they're not getting any better. And they include many matters that are not related actually to policing, which is why we'll just put them on the website, like litter and overflowing bins and so on. But some do relate to policing, like breaches of coronavirus legislation. So the questions are these. First, when will we get a zero-tolerance approach to policing and heavy enforcement action against the criminals that are making the lives of our most vulnerable people suicidal? Secondly, when will we get the public space protection order we desperately need? And thirdly, will Chief Superintendent Una Jennings, the Sheffield District Commander, meet the group to discuss the future or to discuss matters further? So I've got a lot of sympathy with all those who live in this neighbourhood. It is a tightly populated part of Sheffield, very compact, and we know that when you have different communities present in a particular place with different languages, different cultural expectations, some are relatively new people coming from a rural background, trying to learn how to live in an urban context, issues of language and so on, then we know there are likely to be always the possibility of issues, and we know what some of those issues are because we've had them played out in public accountability board meetings before. So as I say, much of this, perhaps most of this, is not directly a policing matter, but there are some policing issues. Those other organisations and individuals that I think have an involvement here include the local authorities, perhaps the schools, certainly the landlords. I've been into some houses in Page Hall, and I think a lot is left to be desired there. So there are the landlords as well as the community itself. So if I can turn to perhaps Tim, if you could give us an overview of what the police response is in Page Hall.
Yeah, I certainly can, Commissioner. So let me just set out. Page Hall is currently policed by our North East Neighbourhood Policing Team. We've talked many times at PAD before and in the public about the investments in neighbourhood policing that the force has made over the last few years. That team is led by an inspector. There's 4 sergeants, 20 PCs and 13 PCSOs currently within that team. And on the 21st of September of this year, when we have the next tranche of new police officers joining South Yorkshire Police, that team is going to be uplifted by an additional sergeant and 8 additional constables. But the practical effect of that on the ground will be that the element of the North East team that currently polices Burn Grieve, which includes Page Hall and the Northern General Hospital, that's going to be split into 2 to create a separate team to cover Page Hall and Fir Vale itself. And that team is currently being selected at the moment and will be in place by the end of September. So there's been a significant increase in neighbourhood policing resources to cover that part of Sheffield over the past news for communities is that is going to be further increased this autumn by a further sergeant and 8 constables. You've already alluded to it, is that the underlying issues in Page Hall start with the physical environment. It's about 300 properties. My understanding is that only about 24 of those properties are actually are in public ownership. Effectively, you've got privately rented properties, as you say, often of very poor quality. You've got multi-occupancy properties, different cultures living there, coming together. Again, those of us who've had significant experience of police in many diverse areas, when you have an environment like that, it is hardly surprising that you find an area that struggles with community cohesion. As you say, the vast majority of incidents, I'm not saying it's not all of them, because there are elements of criminality there, and we do deal with them, and I'll talk about some of those shortly. But the vast majority of incidents relate to antisocial behaviour that emanate out of overcrowding and environmental issues. As the leader of the community group that's posed this question talk about, litter all over the place, really poor environment. I'm told things like exposed drains and sewers are prevalent around there, that leads to a whole raft of environmental health issues that engender antisocial behaviour. That's not to say we haven't had some highly publicised incidents of completely unacceptable disorder, because we have, and we've dealt with that. Let me just deal. So you have a picture of the resources that we put into it. Let me just touch on our approach to COVID enforcement within the Page Hall area. There's no getting away from it. It has been a challenge, and without a doubt, Page Hall has seen the majority of the COVID enforcement penalty notices that have been given out through the entire Sheffield area. But when lockdown was announced, every single address in Page Hall was leafleted within 48 hours, setting out what the restrictions were. We set those out in both English and Slovak. We've worked with Roma students from Hallam University to engage problem addresses and to engage with people who are congregating in the street. There's been high visibility patrols consistently in that area, and there was a 4-week period when the team did little or no other work other than do high visibility patrols in Page Hall. We've arrested a number of issues in connection with that. One man was arrested for threatening a PCSO on COVID patrols. Another mayor was arrested for verbal threats to council street wardens whilst they were enforcing noise and COVID-19 issues. We have and we will continue to take positive action against people who do not comply with our attempts to educate and explain and engage with people. And our approach, we've talked about this before, is absolutely to engage with people, to educate them, to explain, and to persuade people to comply with the COVID legislation for the broader good of the community. But where people fail to do that, we will take action. And 165 of the 310 fixed penalty notices that we've issued in the Sheffield area for breaches of COVID legislation, 165 of those are in the Page Hall area. So I give that commentary just to reassure you that we take the issue of COVID-19 enforcement seriously. We've done it in a proportionate way. We will continue to do that. We obviously, as you're aware, Dave Hartley, who I know is on the line, is gold for the force for COVID, and we continue to work through the implications of the announcements yesterday and how we will take that forward throughout the next weeks and months. But we will continue to take a robust approach where people absolutely refuse to comply with what's required of them. Sorry, I was going to interrupt. So, and could you say something about this wish for a public Commissioner, a public space protection order is something that would have to be applied for via the City Council. It requires both executive and political support for that. It's not something that we could take forward on our own, but we're absolutely clear, and we've done this in numerous areas across the county of South Yorkshire. We will support Sheffield Council in that. We want to be part of that, and if a PSPO is granted and put in place, we will enforce it, as we have done in other areas throughout the county. So absolutely we're supportive of that, but with the caveat, it's not something that the police can take forward alone. No. What I would say is this, is that there is a significant amount of partnership work around Page Hall, and there's a developing infrastructure involving senior people from the police and senior people from the council. And I know that a wide range of responses are being considered. So it is something that we can support. But again, I wouldn't want to, given the fact that this is a public meeting, I wouldn't want to anyone to labour under the impression that that's something that the police can undertake on their own, because it is.
No. I wonder if there's anyone on the line who knows whether this is active in the council, whether it is being progressed at all. I mean, if not, it's something I'll ask my office, to get on with and see what's happening there, because I'd be very supportive of that as well. I mean, it all depends on what you write into it, doesn't it? But if it would help in Page Hall, then it ought to be progressed, I think.
Alan, Gary Weatherall.
Gary, yes.
Yeah, Alan, I'll take this up with Paul later on with the meeting, so I'll take it up with him and see and get back to you.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else from a police perspective on that question?
I think I've given a good overview. I mean, I can talk about some of the incidents, but I'm not sure that would take the picture any further forward. I think the point that I would make in response to it is, the police recognise that Page Hall is a really challenging area, and we want to play our part in terms of improving community safety in that area. But the physical infrastructure of the area, the poor quality housing stock, the fact that there's issues with overcrowding, that there's significant issues with the environment, they have to be addressed as part of that plan. And I know that that's difficult when it's predominantly private rented stock, but there are powers to deal with that. So it requires a partnership approach. I know Una Jennings is on the line. I know he's going to talk about Sheffield and her thoughts on current policing performance in Sheffield shortly. Absolutely, Una and her team are there and willing to engage with people, and they'll have our support as part of the executive team of the force. But this is a complex problem, and it requires a cohesive partnership approach.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think we can probably leave it there. The final question was specifically to Una, and I don't know whether you want to answer that now, as to whether you'd be willing to meet this group. I'm sure you would, but...
Yes, absolutely, Commissioner. I'm very happy to facilitate that.
Okay, we'll make sure that happens as well. Well, thank you very much indeed for that. That's a public question. We don't often get them, and it was good to spend a bit of time on that, because I know it's a matter of interest, not just in the Page Hall area, Firth Park area, but beyond that in the city as well. So moving on then to urgent items, this is item 5, and of course we've, in the last day or two, we've had the new announcements around COVID and the emergency legislation and restrictions, and we now have the rule of 6. And I wondered if I could ask David Hartley if he could say something briefly there about the implications of that, not just for Sheffield, of course, but for the whole of South Yorkshire, the rule of 6.
Of course, Commissioner. Yeah, good morning. We're 7 months into the COVID challenge now, so I'd say we're getting pretty familiar with short notice changes, and as yet we haven't received the formal detail of the regulation, but what I can give is really a fairly clear steer on what we anticipate. We're returning back to a previous level of regulation, and this is going to be formalised, as we've heard, with fixed penalty enforcement of £100. the reassurance is you're not going to see any different approach from South Yorkshire Police. It's going to be the same consistent approach to the 4Es. We'll engage, we'll explain, we'll encourage, and we will, of course, where necessary, enforce. But this has to be a bespoke assessment because we've got a wide variety of potential scenarios where this could be applied, almost endless. We've got the more severe end of unlicensed music events where you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of people coming together, high risk to public health, car cruisers, right the way through to a small family gathering that breaches this. Is it family bubbles? Is it not? And we're asking our officers through the 4Es to make sense of that. So it's going to be the same approach. It'll be a bespoke assessment, and we'll work through the engagement, explanation, encouragement, and then enforcement. What I have heard, and I await the detail of this, which I would very much welcome, and it would be a good intervention, is the mention of COVID marshals, which would be a local authority resource and really fill that space, which I think there has been broad disquiet around, which is the consistency and standards around our pubs, restaurants, bars, open areas. So I think we'll hear more around that when the formal regulation arrives before Monday. And I'll be looking to work by the LRF and the Strategic Coordinating Group to embed COVID marshals alongside policing effort effectively to bring the regulation that we need. So we do rate the regulation. We do anticipate there'll be exceptions around work, weddings, funerals, team sport, question mark over political gatherings. But our approach will be the same. We'll get the detail of the regulation. Our legal services will work through that immediately, even if that's overnight. So by Monday, we will have clear officer guidance. We'll share that externally, and we'll just take that sensible, proportionate approach to any breaches.
Thank you. And the idea of the COVID marshals, this is people to be employed over and above what local authorities currently may have, and helps you as police, because you don't want to be pulling officers off other things to be doing this kind of COVID work if you can avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is where there's been concerns, that there appears to have been standards and adherence to COVID compliance, which is driven by individual licensees rather than a common standard. So you see lip service being played in some areas, and then heavy PPE and compliance in others. That's not a policing role. We're there where we get to the point where we have formal powers. So I think the use of COVID marshals would fill that space and would bring, from a health point of view, the compliance that we need to make sure that the safeguards are in place where we do have legitimate gatherings of more than 6 people in those pubs, restaurants, and so forth. So yes, I would look forward to COVID marshals coming online.
And the COVID marshals will be fully funded, I guess, by the government, because without that, then the capacity of local authorities to do very much will be very limited.
Yeah, I would hope so too. As I say, we are yet to receive the detail of the regulation. We anticipate that over the weekend, so we'll be able to look at that in detail when it does indeed arrive.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody want to say anything on the issues so far? If not, shall we move on then? Item 6, items to be considered in the absence of the public and press. I don't think we have any. Item 7, are there any declarations of interest that we don't know of? Item 8 are the minutes of the last meeting, which is the PAB on the 11th of August. They've been circulated. Is there anyone who wants to say anything about the minutes, or can we accept those as a correct record of what took place?
Alan, it's Andrew Lockley. There's an item I'd ask for a correction on at the bottom of page 8, please.
Yes.
So this relates to the ethics panel's report on COVID. The very last sentence on page 8 is inaccurate. He acknowledged that it was, this is referring to me, that it was sensible to draw a line on 31st July. In fact, we drew the line on 30th of June. Right. Our report covered events only up to the 30th of June. And I think that needs to be clear, obviously, particularly if a later report has to be written.
Yes, we'll gladly do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Apart from that, is there anything else on the minute? Can we receive those? Well, I will receive those as an accurate reflection of that meeting with that one amendment. So on then to item 9, which is matters arising and action. Michelle, this is page 11. I don't think you want to say anything there. I think the first one, reference 391, is now can be taken off, can it? It's been delayed.
Commissioner, there's 3 actions, 391, 392, 393, all relate to report formats. The district report, the first action, has already been agreed, but it will come into play in the October session. The other 2 relate to force templates that are being developed with force colleagues, so that will be in place shortly as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on then in the agenda to force performance reports, the first one at item 10 is the Sheffield District summary. As members of the board will know, and for the benefit of those who don't, we move around South Yorkshire looking at each of the districts in turn, Doncaster, Barnsley, Rotherham and Sheffield, and today it's Rotherham, and we have the district commander, Una Jennings. Her report is before us, which is item 10. I can say to you, Una, because the last time we did this, you were in Rotherham, and as the district commander, so you know the routine. It's a very full report, it's a very detailed report. We don't have time to look, obviously, at everything, so I'm assuming that everybody has read it. I've certainly read it, and what I'll do, therefore, is go straight into the report in specific places, and then invite you at the end if there's anything you think you particularly want to say that I've missed, that you do it there. So thank you very much indeed for the report. And this is the last time we'll have a report where the district commanders write it in their own particular way. We're going to have a template, I think, for the October meeting so that we get a bit of consistency between the reports. So turning to the report itself, I'm going to go straight away then, the Sheffield District Report, to page 17, if I may, and this is paragraph 2.1 on from there, probably the next couple of paragraphs as well. And you're talking very much there about the bridge team, if you could say a little bit about that and their involvement with victims. You talk about ringing back all victims for attended and non-attended burglary and auto crime within 7 days, which is good news, and we'll come back to burglary, residential burglary, a little bit later on as well. But I wondered whether the service to victims, you mentioned vulnerable victims at the end of 2.3. I wonder whether the vulnerable victims at the end of 2.3 include victims of hate crime.
Yes, Commissioner. So taking the bridge in the first instance, I know some of the attendees will be familiar with the approach that we have implemented in Sheffield and across some of the other policing districts, which is an approach which allows us to facilitate officers transitioning back through absence management provision into the workplace again. So what we have in the bridge would have been, at the time this report was written, officers who were either recuperating from sickness and or then officers who potentially were shielding at home. So we were able to tap in and continue to add some value to our frontline provision across those few months via this mechanism. In relation to whether or not it covers hate crime, absolutely, Commissioner, it does. It covers hate crime, vulnerable victims, vehicular crime, and burglary, as you've mentioned. And I think the work in this area really speaks to the improvement alongside the hard work of our frontline officers that you can see then evidence in paragraph 2.5, which is a 13% improvement in relation to victim satisfaction across Sheffield District compared to this time last year.
Thank you. You had someone, I think she was called Molly Fitzpatrick, who was funded by the Community Safety Partnership, working in this area with vulnerable victims. Does that still continue?
Yes, Molly was fantastic. I met Molly when I was last here as detective superintendent. She was one of the students who actually came from the university to work with us on the evidence-based policing work, and then became an employee. Molly has left she has taken a different job, but certainly the role and the work that she was doing will continue now through a hate crime coordinator that we will be recruiting over the course of the next number of months.
Okay, thank you. Moving to page 20, if I may, at the top of the page there, you're talking about a resource management sergeant. This is about getting response times down. And I think we heard about that in when you did a Rotherham report a little while ago. Is this something that is now happening in every district?
Yes, as you know, Commissioner, the genesis of this approach started in Rotherham a number of months ago. It's something now that has been recognised as best practice rolled out across the force. I think it's important to contextualise the response times against what this overall function is actually achieving for us, which is about actually better resource management. So whilst we will, as a default, then get to our jobs safely and obviously quicker than we had been, it's also about deploying the right resource first time and then effectively managing that resource across the 24/7 cycle. So what we managed to do, I believe, in Rotherham, and I think it has been replicated across certainly some of the other districts I'm aware of, and certainly here in Sheffield, is build in a degree of capacity then by virtue of the fact that we are dealing with things in a much more expeditious manner. So I will give you an example. In July, May, June, any of those months, it may have taken us, for example, an hour and a half to deal with a priority incident. It's now taking us, in the last calendar month, around 33 minutes. So you can immediately see the compression and the squeeze, and then we're hopeful then that will realise then that additional capacity that we're aiming for.
Yeah, and we are clear, are we, that the speeding up the response time isn't impacting on the quality of the response that is given?
Yeah, I mean, my perspective on that really is predicated on the experience in Rotherham, which saw, a direct correlation between us dealing with our job, using the right resource in an expeditious fashion, and of course the improvements around victim satisfaction in particular, which had tracked their below force average for a number of years. So I think we have a number of checks and balances. But for me, certainly as a commander, it's not about getting to the job quicker. It's rather just using our resource in a much more efficient and effective way.
Thank you. And at the bottom of the page, this is 2.10. You talk about an evidence review team, the creation of evidence review team. Again, is this something that's happening across all districts? It seems a very good idea, and I presume these are experienced officers who are doing this work. Could you just say a little bit about what that's all about?
Yes, absolutely, Commissioner. Again, it is something that is happening right across the force. Commenced in Rotherham District last December. The approach around evidence review teams, evidence review officers, is really around us trying to help support our frontline officers in particular, our volume crime investigations that our youngest and most inexperienced officers are dealing with, to make really good investigative choices and decisions at the earliest point. So what that sees us doing here now in Sheffield is reviewing every single prisoner that we take in through our custody suite and the relevant evidential package then that sits behind that prisoner process, so we can help shape at the earliest point the decisions that we might make about whether we will take that case to CPS, whether we need further investigative support or guidance from some specialism, or indeed whether,
Sharon Baldwin,
for example, suitable
has
for
left the conference.
A different type of outcomes. Very much about trying to improve the quality of the investigations that we're conducting across the district.
Can I ask, how far are you impeded by delays in forensics, getting results back, PSI attendance of burglaries? Is this an issue?
I don't see it as an issue particularly. burglary, Commissioner. You know, I mean, you don't need to be a detective to understand that a good examination by a CSI and then their forensic field thereafter has a direct impact on how successful we are both catching and prosecuting burglars. I don't see it as a particular issue. I think it's something that we as an organisation, we as police in Sheffield need to be a demanding customer around in relation to our regional forensic provision. But I think, it's very much to the fore of our thinking whenever we're attending burglaries, accepting that a good proportion of offences that we would classify as residential burglary are things like shed breaks, etc., which it may not be appropriate to deploy a forensic examiner to that particular scene. Each one of them is assessed, but I have no particular issue to raise at all with yourself.
And in the figures that you produce that we can get hold of, is it clear when a residential burglary is not a shed, but is actually a house? Is that clear for us?
I don't think we disaggregate the figures in that way. We classify our burglaries according to the guidance offered by the Home Office Commissioner, and that would include burglaries wherein a shed's been broken into.
Alan, can I just talk more broadly about burglary and some of those issues for a second? So, the challenge around recording that Una alluded to, I would probably be a little bit more, I suppose, challenging around that. The change in recording standards means it's very difficult to compare figures of perhaps 2.5 years ago with figures of today, because we used to deal with burglary dwelling with the Home Office classification, which wasn't exactly what it says on the tin. Really, it was breaking and entering into a house. That has since been expanded to include sheds. So the answer to your question is, do we know the breakdown of burglaries? Yes, we do, but it takes a little bit more work to analyse that now than it did perhaps a few years ago. But it's not beyond the capacity of the force. We do it. I think the thing to remember with burglary, and this has been, the case forever really, is that if you have 100 burglaries, you haven't got 100 burglars, because people who commit burglary, it tends to be driven by issues around addiction. They tend to commit multiple burglaries as a result of funding funding that particular habit, which means that the importance of forensic examination and actually identifying an offender is really, really important. So the push for us as a force, and certainly my direction to all the commanders, is about improving the rate of CSI attendance at burglaries. I'm not convinced it is quite as tight as it needs to be. So we're examining that for the current QPR process. And then the management of those forensic products when they come back, making sure that that's really, really robust, that there's effective levels of supervision, and that we are absolutely robust in terms of, if we get an identification of a potential offender, they are arrested, the day that the forensic kit arrives, that there's no delay, because so often people who commit this sort of offence are recidivist offenders. Whilst when they're not arrested, they're out committing further offences. So it is a challenge, but it's one that we're up to, and it's one that's absolutely got my attention at the moment.
Yeah, okay. And it's something we will be returning to, and something that I'll ask Kevin Wright in my office to follow through as well. Can I take it now to page 25? And this is para 3.8. Well, it's the top, and the paras that follow that, and it's around drug-related crime, organised crime gangs, and so on. And Lauren, I know you now chair a committee which brings together the armed crime teams, OCGs, the Violence Reduction Unit, and so on. I wonder if you could say a little bit about that and how you see that progressing, and then perhaps you could say something about organised crime gangs in parts of Sheffield, which are a continuing problem for us. I think Lauren may have gone. Well, Una, do you want to say something?
Alan, Alan, I could cover. It's Michelle. I could cover the Serious Violence Programme Board if you like. Lauren chairs it, and I deputy chair it on your behalf.
Yes.
It's the purpose is to bring together, as you say, the activity for the Force Task Force, the activity that's been funded by the government through surge funding, the new Armed Criminality Unit, and the work of the Violence Reduction Unit, and really embed the two approaches across the force and the partnership, and also monitor on the VR, the Violence Reduction Executive Board's behalf, the delivery of the mandatory products to partners at a lower operational level, and manage risks on the partner's behalf. And then issues are escalated by exception and reported, performance is reported, and risks are reported then to your Violence Reduction Executive Board at a partnership level.
Thank you. At the end of 3.9, it talks about emergent issues, and I wondered what you thought they were.
Sorry, Commissioner, are you directing that to me or to Michelle?
Don't mind. You have a go.
All right, Commissioner. There'll not be issues that you would be unfamiliar with in relation to organised crime, sir. I mean, in terms of framing them as emergent issues, I would suggest the issues that we are alive to in Sheffield City are issues around county lines, are issues around our young people in particular getting involved in violent criminality, and are issues around drugs, which seems to me to be a driver of a lot of this activity across our city. In terms of the Fortify team here in Sheffield, they're a really proactive group of officers, as you might imagine, and some of the results that they have been able to realise are listed at the bottom of page 25. And they are now supported, of course, by the team that you've mentioned already, which is the ACT team, which is a team headed by a Detective Superintendent, who will now proactively be supporting the policing of the space around firearms-enabled crime across our city. They've had some really good successes already. Seized some 17 firearms in the last month alone. Have arrested a number of key people across our city that are causing difficulties in this space. 36, in fact, just in the last month, 10 of whom are now on remand for a range of offences from attempted murder through to other firearms-enabled criminality, and are doing a really good job for you, and I imagine will continue to do that for the next number of months and years in support of what we're delivering locally.
Can I point you to 310 and at the end there where you do mention county lines, and I just wondered what it meant by saying you had an increased focus on county lines. What's being done now that wasn't done before? What's being done more of?
What we're doing around county lines, and I suppose it probably isn't, that wouldn't necessarily be how I would frame it in terms of doing more of something that hadn't been done previously. I think what we are talking about in the context of that particular sentence is that we have had an increased tasking in relation to the collection of intelligence around county lines, and an increased focus in relation to some of the key lines of criminality that are driving some of the behaviours we're seeing in our cities. For example, firearms coming in to Sheffield, the import and export of drugs-enabled crime both into and out of the city. And really that's led to then
has joined the conference.
Previous to that, which talks about the increase in the number of mapped organised crime groups that we have across the city, which really just speaks to efficacy around our intelligence management and gathering.
Okay, thank you. And then in para 312, again on page 25, the list you referred to there, it includes this extraordinary, it's bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4. Controlled drugs recovered with approximate street value of, and then there's a staggering figure of £1,034,000. I just wonder, as we get into these, if this is the street value, some of these gangs potentially can make a lot of money. And as we make arrests and bring people to trial, it raised the question of
Commissioner. I mean, we are proactively looking at this as a force. As you may be aware, we have now got embedded financial investigators working alongside each of our teams tackling organised crime across each of our respective districts. And I can imagine that a net result of that will be being much more proactive in this space in relation to using that FOCA legislation in a manifestly more proactive way. So it's something that we look at every single month when we review the work that we're doing around this, something that we bring, of course, to our Force Performance Day and indeed to our quarterly performance meetings in relation to how we are managing this. And I, like you, would be hopeful and confident that we will see some of this money both seized from these criminals and reinvested where it's needed across our city.
Could you just say a word about how POCA works? How do you have to make an application at some point in the call process?
Yes, we do. We absolutely do. That's exactly how it works. So where we can directly attribute finance or assets back to criminal enterprise, we can make an application to the court to both have those assets seized and then have a proportion of those assets then reinvested, if you will, back into the force, into an area of business that we think is appropriate. And I think you've mentioned some of the areas that you would like to see us look to in the next couple of months, and certainly that's something I think that we will be absolutely all over. Yeah,
it must be quite a labour though, actually trying to work that out. What is feasible?
It's a lengthy process, but it's worthwhile, as you can imagine, because actually the use can sometimes be quite significant. But yeah, it is a really complex process, but we're well supported by our legal services department in that endeavour.
Thank you. I'm on to page 28. Sorry, that. Yeah.
So, Commissioner, it's only ACC Forb again. I was just going to talk a little bit more broadly about financial investigation, and in particular some of the success we're having. It is continuing to increase the amount of cash that we are seizing across the force. I think probably, as you're aware, that all districts have had financial investigators invested locally now that work to the local DCI. Barnsley, in particular, we invested in an additional financial investigation at Barnsley, which is effectively paying for itself now in terms of the increase that we're seeing in the amount of cash seized and confiscated. And in particular, at Barnsley, they've had success at going back over previous confiscation orders up to 10 years ago that have never actually been fulfilled, and looking at what assets people seem to have acquired since that time. And they're having some considerable success. And that's an approach that we're very keen to see replicated and standardised across the force.
Oh, that's very good to hear. Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at page 28, and towards the bottom there, final paragraph, there's a mention of an Albanian organised crime group and their activities. And I just want to note for my own information, whether it goes on to the top of page 29. Are these people routinely deported if they're found guilty in a trial, or do you have to make some application for them to be deported? How does that work?
Yes, Commissioner, we have to make an application for them to be deported once they've been convicted. I wouldn't describe it as routine, but it's certainly something that's considered in each and every case where it is appropriate to do so.
Yes, thank you. I think the other questions I got were around page 4, but I think you've answered all of those in the question we had at the beginning. So I don't think there's anything else I wanted to particularly draw attention to myself, and I wondered whether there was anything, Una, that you wanted to raise that hasn't come up.
No, Commissioner, not for me, other than just say, obviously I'm reporting on work here that in truth has been done by someone else's hand, in that I have just taken over Sheffield in the last number of weeks from Chief Superintendent Stuart Barton, who would have been speaking to you at your last Public Accountability Board meeting. So really, from my perspective, it was just to acknowledge that a lot of the things that we are celebrating in this report really is down to Stuart's leadership and work in the district. And of course, I hope to continue in his footsteps and on the path that he has set over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, we did thank Stuart Barton at our last meeting for all the work that he's done. He set a very high bar, Una, which I'm sure you will step up to. But we welcome you to Sheffield as the district commander, and thank you very much for that report. Thank you. I'm moving on the agenda to item 11 then, which is, which I think, Tim, you're probably going to talk to, which is one of one of the three priorities of the Police and Crime Plan. We have protecting vulnerable people, tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, and this one, which is treating people fairly. So again, Tim, if we could assume that people have read the report, and if I take you to one or two things, and then see whether there's anything that you want me to draw to our attention that we haven't touched on. If I start on page 48 and the issue around complaints, and I'm just interested to get your take on that. This new definition of complaint is classified as an action of dissatisfaction
has left the conference
with the police, which of course is quite broad. I wondered if you could say something about the movement. Essentially, it's about a cultural shift, is it, from a culture of blame and punishment to one of that uses complaints as a mechanism for the forced learning lessons, if I can put it that way. Could you say something around that?
Yeah. Well, I think we've been really clear about the journey that we're on as a force. It's the force has been on the journey that means that today HMIC independently assesses as good right across the board, and that wasn't the case a few years ago. And they recognise that in terms of lawful and ethical behaviour, they describe the force as outstanding. That doesn't mean that we rest on our laurels. Our ambition is absolutely to be outstanding as a force, and to be making sure that the people in the communities of South Yorkshire receive the very, very best in policing. There has to be an element of humility around that. We recognise we do not get it right all the time. Policing is a complex business. We operate in a grey space a lot of the time. And I think probably the police complaint system, historically, it's been very much about misconduct. It's been very much about treating where an officer's actions aren't necessarily up to scratch, treating it as a misconduct issue rather than an opportunity to learn lessons. As you'll see from the report, where officers do commit misconduct, where a written warning as a minimum is required, we absolutely deal with that, and we deal with issues like that. I won't say regularly, because the overwhelming majority of our officers work very, very hard and are absolutely committed to serving the public of South Yorkshire. But where they do transgress the code of conduct, we do deal with it. But where someone's dissatisfied with the response, what we want to do is take a far more nuanced approach to that, to understand why they're not dissatisfied, try and fix that as soon as possible, and to make sure that where we can learn lessons, where we can improve, where we can identify there's a systemic issue there in terms of the way that we're dealing with it, where there's an opportunity for learning and development to feed into the training cycle, to make sure that whatever's caused dissatisfaction doesn't become systemic. We want to take that opportunity. So we're taking advantage of the legislative reforms to be able to manage that going forward and make sure that we become even more a learning organisation that's absolutely focused on providing the best quality service to the public.
Thank you very much. Could you link perhaps some of this to page 49, the Equality Hub, if you could say a word about that, what it is and what it's doing, what it's seeking to do? It's 3.13.
Well, the Equality Hub effectively brings together all our staff associations. Much has been made about recruitment to the police, the different percentages of people with protected characteristics in the police. police, and absolutely we're doing a lot of work around recruitment and improving the diversity of the force. But inclusion is really important. We've got a lot of diversity within the organisation already, and absolutely we acknowledge that there are certain areas where we need to improve that. But it's really important that we have a central point where, at an executive level, we can listen to people to understand what the issues are, right across our workforce, both in terms of the way that we manage the workforce and the way that we deliver our services externally. And again, it is about, at its heart, being a learning organisation and using the power of our diverse workforce to understand what we do from different perspectives and translate that into operational delivery.
Thank you. And in terms of operational delivery, etc., can we look at page 50 and page 50, para 321? This is all about recruitment, training and retention of officers of a diverse background. Now, there's some success there, but still a bit of a way to go in terms of the ethnic diversity, in particular, of South Yorkshire Police. I wonder if you could just say something around that.
Well, absolutely. You point out that we are starting to see a shift, but that there is more to do. We've just got a new recruitment campaign underway at the moment.
Has left the conference.
A new recruitment campaign is underway at the moment. There is, an equality and diversity plan attached to that recruitment plan. You can see that within Q1 of 2021, at the top of page 51, of the 81 police officers that we recruited in Q1, 8.6% of them came from BME backgrounds and 7.4% from visible minority ethnic backgrounds. So it is an improvement. No one is for 1 second suggesting that we can't improve more, because we can. I think that the important
has joined the conference.
That's complemented the involvement of our neighbourhood staff and the involvement of them in communities, encouraging people to consider a career in policing, and we're actively undertaking that as we move through this current recruitment campaign now into the autumn.
And are there positive actions that can be taken as opposed to positive discrimination? And if there are, what are they? Are SYP using positive actions?
So there are a number of opportunities in terms of people can access digital mentors to talk about policing, to understand the application process, what's required. We're doing quite a lot of work within communities as well through our neighbourhood teams, targeting community groups, organisations that have a particular concentration of people from the communities that we're looking to recruit from, to make sure that we're maximising the opportunity for people who previously wouldn't have considered their career in police, highlighting the great diverse career that you can have as a police officer, and encouraging people to consider policing when they may have not done that in the past.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to comment on. I wonder whether there are things that you did, though, Tim, that I've missed.
I think the point that I'd want to bring out is, you really paragraph 4 about what our future areas of development are. I think the point I really want to make is that we are determined to continue to develop as a learning organisation. A desire to become outstanding simply won't happen unless we can embed that. So there's a lot to be learned from the period of disruption through COVID-19 in terms of our workforce practice. We've had far more people undertaking agile working than would previously been the case. And I think, I genuinely look back and think, why weren't we doing this years ago? Because you think of the implications for people with a work-life balance, the implications for flexible working, and that again opens up the organisation to a far more diverse workforce. So, we've got an area of delivery around that. I think the work that's been done within PSD now around our response to complaints about service and making sure that not only do we deal with them in accordance with the new legislative provisions, but we absolutely make that learning circle really effective. So, if people complain about something, we make sure that there's a feedback loop in terms of individual and organisational learning. Continue to understand opportunities that present themselves through the Equality Hub, and continue to focus on our recruitment and retention strategy that is representative going forward. Absolutely, as an executive team, we are committed to doing everything that we can to deliver a police service that reflects and represents all parts of the community and all communities in South Yorkshire.
As you know, I've been meeting with representatives of the Black Lives Matter group in South Yorkshire, and so far they've not wanted to speak directly with South Yorkshire Police or indeed any organisations, but we're gradually having in those meetings people from, for example, the Crown Prosecution Service, and I think eventually we ought to have the police along as well. And I think if I can report back to them that there is a spirit of openness here on the part of the force, you do want to learn directly from them how things might be made better, how things might be improved. I think that would help us in South Yorkshire at any rate to make some real progress in this direction.
If I could just encapsulate that this way, Alan. We are absolutely clear that outstanding policing is something that's done with the community, not to the community. And throughout our day-to-day operational activities, throughout, having to enforce the COVID legislation, we constantly seek to do that with the community. And you do that through building trust and confidence. And we're absolutely clear, anything that we can do to improve the trust and confidence of all our communities, increasing in South Yorkshire, we will seek to do that. So, I can't say it any more plainly than that.
Thank you. I can take that back to the meetings that we have.
Alan, it's Andrew. Could I just add a point which hasn't been entirely covered? What's notable about this report is the number of times there's a reference to data being collected, and over the 5 years in which the ethics panel has operated, data collection has improved. I mean, we asked over that period for data about this, that, and the other. And I think in relation to diversity, whether it's to do with who makes complaint, what's the ethnicity or gender of an officer complained about, or whether it's arrest or disposal, or as we most recently asked for data about the ethnicity of those against whom force was used, is really important. And I know the force acknowledges this, to have the data to hand, because without the data, incorrect narratives, there's space for incorrect narratives to be built up. And I think that going forward is something on which even greater emphasis needs to be laid. So that was my contribution.
Yeah, thank you very much. You're absolutely right, and it's an area that I'm particularly interested in is the data that we have and how we use it, and the reliability of it, and so on, and how up to date it is, etc. Thank you. I mean, Andrew, while you're on the line, we ought to congratulate you. I'm not sure we've mentioned the Public Accountability Board, but you've been appointed to a national committee of the National Police Chiefs Council, which is looking at, I think, COVID-19. And
sorry.
Yeah, well, you tell us about it.
Well, I think you have already very kindly congratulated me at a previous meeting, but just very briefly for the meeting. Yes, I'm on the opt CALA, which is the COVID Operation COVID Ethics Committee, and we meet every month virtually, of course, for the MPCC to put to us what they describe as ethical dilemmas. So it might be in relation to, and is in relation to, largely to enforcement of regulations. So we've dealt with international travel, with face masks, with raves, and so on. And I've no doubt that at the next meeting, at the beginning of next month, we should be dealing with whatever regulations, as Mr. Hartley said, are about to come out, and seek to give any guidance that we're asked for. It's a very interesting role with a limit of a year, on the assumption that everything will be different in a year. Well, let's wait and see.
Yeah, and I think it's very good that we've been able to have you at our independent expert panel, and we've been able to make that national contribution as a result of that. So thank you very much for that.
Okay.
So shall we then turn to item 12, which is a report. I think David Hartley, you're going to speak to this. It's about well-being in South Yorkshire Police. I mean, obviously, coronavirus has presented challenges for all of us in all organisations, and in the office of, in my office, OPCC, we've been working from home since the end of March, beginning to have people back into the office in small numbers, but essentially there's been a lot of home working during this period, and that's been quite a challenge to manage all of that. And you have police staff who, of course, are office-based, but you also have people who are absolutely at the front end, and that presents its own particular challenges. So we are concerned about the well-being of the force, and this is what you're addressing in this report. So, David, if you just say a few words about it.
Sure, absolutely, Commissioner. If I wind us back before the COVID challenge, as we mentioned a few times, the force's ambition to offer outstanding service. When we first began defining that ambition, it became absolutely clear that the only hope that we could have achieved in this was focused upon getting our workforce and supporting them to be as fit, to be as well, to be as motivated as they possibly could be. We have no hope of delivering outstanding service if our workforce is in a fairly shabby state. So the investment very much has been around doing all that we can. And policing is a fantastic career, but as you alluded to, Commissioner, it involves defying human nature, that you have to head towards things that all common sense says you ought to be going in the opposite direction. And COVID brought the same challenge, that we've offered continual service right from February, where officers have continued to get in harm's way, that where they've needed to, they've laid hands on to protect the public, and faced some significant hostility and people spitting and using COVID as almost a weapon and a deterrent towards officers has become fairly commonplace. So we continue to provide service throughout. Where we can, we've allowed people to operate remotely and to work from home, but policing very much is a contact business, and we simply could not withdraw. So you're right, the challenge around well-being, our focus was there throughout. And that, Commissioner, I think what I'd do is just quickly define really the report to say we focused upon investing in all of our staff around their physical, psychological and social well-being. And if I just briefly touch on each of those, the physical aspect, of course, if an officer or a member of staff gets injured, then we have the formal occupational health unit and all manner of referrals, to make sure that we support in terms of injury recovery. Outside of that, in terms of trying to keep people in a fit and healthy place, then we have a vast array of forced gymnasiums. We've managed those in line with government guidelines, but brought those back online with COVID compliance as soon as we can, and they are now back in full use. We've invested in the state-of-the-art technology with what are called wellbeing kiosks. These are fantastic things. We bought 7 of them, just being rolled out now, and essentially over 5 minutes, this machine makes an assessment of your blood pressure, your BMI, your body fat index, your heart rate, and gives you a sense of where your overall sort of physical health is, which is fantastic, and that can then give indications of where I need to focus. Physical side of things for the force, we have a very, very successful and active sports and social club. We have well over 50 sporting groups. Yes, they've been curtailed in the short term, but that activity, as soon as it can, will resume. And then we have bespoke physical support around wellbeing walks for particular teams and members of staff. So we do all that we can from a physical point of view. The area of real development for the force has been the investment around psychological. This has often been an area that has been either ignored or just seen as too complex. At the acute level, of course, we have support there with occupational health, and policing brings, those exceptions around crisis and trauma and what our staff, particularly on the front line, have to deal with. So that is there and has always been there. Our investment really has been around the resilience of the force, around more day-to-day of making sure that our staff are well prepared for the rigours of policing. So we've got a variety of options there. We've developed, and I would mention particularly at this point, the Backup Buddy app. This is on all of the forces equipment in terms of force phones. It's also available on general iPhones and Android. And we've seen that now downloaded approaching 3,000 times, as well as it being on all force equipment. And that gives the route into this physical and psychological routes. There is a great depth of offer there, whether that's around mindfulness, the chimp management, the colour of leadership. We employ in terms of psychological support, NEO-PIR, behavioural and leadership styles, Myers-Briggs. And all of this comes together, really, to give a range of support and options that is right for an individual member of staff. And we offer that to the member of staff. We offer it specifically under a piece of training we did around with a company called Elios for bespoke focus on supervisors for their understanding. And also, we've taken it to a level that I don't think any of the forces are doing in terms of support for family of those who work in South Yorkshire Police to understand and recognising psychological and mental health impact for those loved ones who work as part of the organisation. So we're trying to build very much global support around the psychological side. We have the Employer Assist Programme, which is a 24/7. We have trauma support, and we work with our staff associations. Right across the organisation, we have 200 plus wellbeing champions who've had bespoke training, so are a familiar face in the workplace who can talk to colleagues discreetly if needs be, and can signpost and support those who may need psychological support. And the way I would summarise that is, if we were to call the IQ of the organisation, those professional skills, those qualifications, and all our roles are formally accredited, you could align those to saying, we can define those. The EQ, the emotional quotient, is what we're talking around here. How do we develop in terms of our leadership, our relationships, our well-being, and the core service values, as well as individual values, to bring that all together in terms of that psychological well-being and support.
Do you rag?
In terms of the social side, I mentioned
the conference.
We have a wide network of social support in terms of both sporting activity and social activity to keep that family feel of South Yorkshire Police in terms of that broad support. So really the paper talks to all of those things, but really the headlines are, we are driving forward really health and wellbeing in line with the National Oscar Kilo and the Blue Light Framework to make sure that if we have any hope of aspiring to be outstanding, we really need to try and get the whole of our workforce into an outstanding position.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it would be true to say in the 6 years that I've been doing this, the emphasis, while remaining on physical health and well-being, there's been a real shift towards psychological and emotional in the force, which is right, and it's very good to see. And of course, particularly at this moment in time, where I guess that is really something that we have to think about, emotional and psychological support for people. Just on page 56, I was very pleased to see this on your next step,
Commissioner, what we recognise there is that quite often, it's the loved ones and those close to members of staff who recognise, the early symptoms and signs that something's not quite right. So our approach is very much reaching out to those so they can understand what we can offer and, be part of
the conference.
An early intervention if things at work are beginning to have an impact. So very much that approach to family, yes.
Absolutely. Is there anything anybody wants to add to this, or are we happy with that?
That's all right.
Thank you. I think, Michelle, we need a well-being kiosk in the office. Right, it's a death sort of going in it, but anyway.
I'll see if I can find the cupboard.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. What it reveals, it told me that it anticipated I was about 10 years older than I actually am, so that was a bit of a stark reminder. So, tread with caution.
Penalty of the job, I'm afraid. Thank you very much indeed for that. So, moving on then in our agenda to Chief Executive's report. First of all, item 13. This is the annual report, my annual report, looking back over the past year. Michelle's is 59 to 80. Frankly, I'm not sure that there is a lot to be said. I think all we need to do is just receive it. It will eventually appear as a glossy document with photographs of me with a horse and me with a dog and that sort of thing. So unless there's something you wanted to point to, Michelle, I think we can just receive it.
Yes, the cover report says it's your statutory responsibility. It's incorporated now, comments from the panel, Alan, and it will be published if you approve that publication now.
Okay, thank you very much. So moving on to item, unless anybody else has got a comment, shall we move then to item 14, which is PCC decisions, pages 81 to 84. Michelle?
Or White House.
Yes, Commissioner,
Has left the conference.
Again, I wasn't proposing to say anything really in relation to this. It records your decisions from last time, unless there's any questions. The community grant scheme has been 3 bids successful out of 9 that were received, and there are other decisions there for any members that want to raise any questions.
Are there any questions? If not, shall we move quickly on then to item 15, the Violence Reduction Unit update. Rachel, are you there? I didn't hear you at the beginning.
I am, yes. Sorry, I joined late.
That's okay. And is it just yourself?
It is.
Okay. So this is pages, as I say, 85 to 92. If you want to say a word about this, and also perhaps tell us about the visit on Friday of the senior civil servant, which is very important.
Okay, I've picked out a few key points just to highlight to people. So the area profile and response strategy was published on Tuesday. That's now available on our website and well worth a look at. The format of the needs assessment is quite nice because you can select which areas you want to go to without having to go through a really lengthy document. What really has stood out to me over the past year, because we're about a year in now, is South Yorkshire's response to violence as a whole. I think that all organisations involved are so passionate, and that's really clear from the local action plans that are being coordinated by Community Safety Partnership. Everyone's really on board and committed to reducing and preventing violence in South Yorkshire. We've now established a trauma-informed steering group for South Yorkshire, which is great news as part of our commitment and aim to achieve a trauma-informed South Yorkshire over the next 3 years. The Plan B custody navigators will be in Doncaster custody as well as at Shepcott Lane for Rotherham and Sheffield from the 17th of September. We've got 7 schools across South Yorkshire who are interested or committed to being involved in the Mentors in Violence Prevention programme, which is fantastic given all the challenges that they have at the moment. Forging Ahead, which is our the employability programme, jointly funded between the task force and the BRU, is now accepting referrals for people on the periphery of crime as well as people that have received sentences.
We are developing performance measures, and the evaluation, it will shortly be underway. It's just awaiting ethical approval. And we've been asked nationally by Public Health England to chair a steering group on community engagement, following our community input into the strategy right from the very start. Oh, and then the visit on Friday, so they're the key parts in the report, I think. And we're being visited on Friday by the Permanent Under-Secretary, which is very exciting. He's coming to see the hospital navigators and Plan B custody navigators.
Thank you. Yes, it does seem as if we're making a mark nationally, the work of the VRU here, and not just in South Yorkshire. But I agree with you. I think the concept, public health approach, has been embraced by all our partners, and that's really good news, and by police. And we've forged some very good working relationships there, and so far, so good. And of course, we've got the money for the VRU committed this year. Our national government. We wait for the comprehensive spending review in the autumn and hope that there'll be some indication from that funding will be available to the VRU going forward, because this is a long-term project, there is a project, and without that funding it's not possible to do it. So we've made those points very forcibly to ministers over the past few weeks, and we look forward to the comprehensive spending review results and to some recognition of that in this year's hour. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to pick up on, Rachel. Is there anybody else who's got any questions of Rachel and the VRU? I don't know whether we've got Lauren back. Have we got Lauren?
Yeah, apologies, Commissioner. Somebody came into my office at exactly the same time you asked me a question earlier.
That's all right. I can take you off the missing persons list. That's all I was thinking. I wondered if you wanted to say anything about the working of the VRU in SYP and how that's doing.
Yeah, I think we're making significant steps now to embed sort of the VRU principles, the public health approach, across our portfolio of work around engagement through Operation Fortify. I think the links between the VRU and our operational teams are really strengthening, and we're starting to really see some results from that. And we've got some training events coming up, some familiarisation events planned across the force, and we've now established the VRU Champions Network, which I think Rachel would agree is really helping to embed the VRU across the force.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, good luck tomorrow with the visit, because these things are always important, and that we lodge in the mind of the civil servants what we're doing and how well we're doing and why we're unique and the things that we're doing here. And of course, he will feed into that whole process of the Home Office talking to the Treasury about funding going forward. Thank you very much. That's item 15. Thank you, Rachel. Item 16 then, the PAD work programme. Michelle, page 96, 96, anything to say there?
No, Commissioner.
Oh, that was quick. Item 17, any other business, which should have been notified to me at the beginning of the meeting. None was, so there can't be any, which brings us then to the date and time of the next meeting, which is the 13th of October 2020. Which is the district, Sally, that is reporting at that?
Well, you're putting me on the spot now, Alan. I'll just check 2 seconds.
Well, don't worry. Whichever it is, we need to ensure that we've got that template in place.
It'll be Doncaster.
Doncaster. Right. Thank you very much. I think that's everything, everybody, then. So thank you very much for your attendance. And we did get it in within an hour and a half, which was what we were trying to do. Thank you very much indeed, everyone.